Welcome to the podcast supported by the Writing for Success grant, a 100% federally funded community projects grant of $385,000 to support literacy in the Milledgeville, Baldwin County community. I'm your host, Jess McQuain, project coordinator. Grab a snack and pull up a chair. I'm glad you're here. Welcome back to the Writing for Success podcast for another Writer Wednesday. On Writer Wednesday, we hear from writers and teachers of writing about their writing process, advice for young writers, and general discussion of what writing means to them.
Well, first off, say your name and tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Michael Cruz. I am a professor in comm at Georgia College, focusing mainly on the film and television side of things. Born and raised in Iowa, spent some time in Phoenix, and made my way over here to the great state of Georgia.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to interview you about was we were talking about writing, and something I think a lot of younger people don't get introduced a lot was screenwriting. So what are some of the differences to say writing a short story or a novel compared to writing a screenplay?
I think one thing you got to think about when comparing to other prose type thing, meaning like a novel or a short story, is that when you're writing a novel or short story, when it's done, that is what people see. That's the purpose, that they will read those pages. That is the end product. Whereas a film script is really just the blueprint for something else to be made. So you don't have, a ton of people per se reading these scripts other than the ones that are behind making them, or just people that like to study script writing. So you've got that aspect. And then because of that, because it really is just a blueprint to make something that is visual, a lot of the, literary fluff, we'll call it, the, stuff that makes novel writers so great, oftentimes is kind of frowned upon because you don't want that fluff. You don't want that stuff. It's more matter of fact, somebody goes somewhere and that's what you need to say. You don't need to get too heavy-handed into, all of the flowery language that you would see in a novel or something.
Yeah. So with a character, describing a character compared to how much would you describe a character in a script?
When you first meet them, because obviously characters developed through all of their actions and all of the words they said. So that, takes a lot of time to do. But in that official first meeting, I imagine, in a novel, you might have half a page, perhaps, introducing a character. You probably have 4 or 5 sentences maybe for a script before you're off and they're doing stuff.
Yeah. I know one of the things you said during class was just sometimes it's easy to just give an age or say, if they're big or short or something like that. It's very simple descriptions compared to a novel that can be really long and, like you said, flowery.
Yeah, when you're, really with any descriptions in a film script, I'm not going to say this is a hard rule, but aiming for three things that describe what something looks like is oftentimes a good number to go by, because if you're going more than that, then you're just saying too much and it's bogging down the script. It's slowing it down. If 1 or 2 works, then go with it. But, a small handful, which 3, I guess, would be about that, is a pretty good idea to kind of just use as your jump off point. And then, because it's all about keeping the reader of the script moving. You don't want them to slow down because, again, it's not a novel. You're not trying to wrap their head around these things. You're trying to keep the action moving because, again, it's an action. It's a visual medium, so you want to keep moving.
Yeah. With you was talking about speed and everything, how a page of a script, how long is that put into a film? How many minutes or seconds or whatever? Yeah,
the common go-to is basically if you write a page of script, it's usually about a minute on screen. Obviously, that can vary within range to, maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes. If you have a page of script that's nothing but descriptions and it's several locations of things happening, that might need 2 minutes on that page, on the screen. But if it's just nothing but dialogue, that could be done maybe in 35 seconds. So the general rule, 1 page, 1 minute, and that just kind of at least gets you in the ballpark of where you kind of think you are.
Yeah. In one of my classes, we're doing a 10-minute short film, and a lot of it is, since it's a comedy script, it's a lot of talking. We were thinking, oh, we have 10 pages, we're good. And then we went to film, and then we started editing, and we realized we only had like 5 minutes. So like every page of us just talking was 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It wasn't a full minute. With like structuring a script, there's a lot of like novels, kids are taught about, like the hero's journey, which is like King Arthur, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars has the hero's journey. Is there a type of structure like that in script writing?
Yeah, I mean, everything, hero's journey, whatever, all these things are stories. You go home and you talk to your friends about what happened today. That's a story. All we do is tell stories all day long, and every good story has 3 elements at the base. You have your beginning, middle, end. And if you're talking about films, that becomes Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. As far as hero's journey, or there's Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, there's 100, probably thousands of different books and things out there that talk about structure. And, it's really just that thing that you find what works good for you to help you get from point A to point B. But what does point A to point B have to be? Beginning, middle, end. Everything else is just kind of what works for you. But it's all built around just drama. If there's nothing happening, if there's no change, then you really don't have a story either. Like, you have to have these struggles, because nobody wants to see somebody in a film get everything that they want in the end. I mean, it's kind of depressing to watch that. So it's all about struggle. It's all about drama, getting us from point A, the beginning, Act 1, through the meat of the story, the Act 2, and then bring it home with the Act 3, the climax or conclusion or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. What for you is like the most challenging part of writing a screenplay? Is it coming with like the idea, or is it the characters? Is it like certain parts of the screenplay?
It depends. It really depends on the script and the idea. I mean, sometimes like I'll like the idea, but I know I need to do some research, but then I'll get into this research like pit where it's hard to get out of, because I'm constantly looking up more stuff and not feeling like I have enough, and constantly looking up stuff where at some point you just have to say, you know what, that's enough. I just need to put some pages down, and if it works, it works. If not, then I can go back and do some more research. On the flip side, there's people that do it totally the opposite way. They'll just spit up whatever pages they have without thinking about anything. And again, usually it doesn't work, but that's their plan. You know, that script that they just kind of threw up on the page is their outline, is their research, and then they take that and refine and refine and refine. I mean, whatever process you do in education, most students are used to doing like a draft for an essay and then cleaning it up and turning it into a final. That's not the case with scripts. I mean, you could have 15 drafts mixed in with 5 stages of research. I mean, it's something that takes a lot of time, and unless you're very lucky, which there are those cases, you know, it's not a one and done or a one and sort of clean up and done sort of process.
Yeah. With television and film, script writing is very similar. How do you determine this is a good film script and this is a good like television script?
The easiest thing to think of is pretty simple, is does this have an end? And if it has a clear end, then it's probably a film. If it's something that doesn't necessarily have an end in sight, then you've got a TV show, because you need a lot of content for a TV show. I mean, your goal is, you know, back in the day when you had, and it probably still is to an extent today, but back in the day you were trying to, for television creators, show creators, you were trying to hit about like 100 shows, because once you hit that, what you were able to do was to syndicate it, and that's where you got all the money. You were able to sell it to like your cable channels, and at that point it's all profit, because you're not actually making anything more, they're just paying to show it. So for shows, it's about making sure you have enough content, and again, thinking of it, does this feel like it has a finite story? And if it does, then try to wrap that up into a film. But if it's more about, you know, a long journey, a long process, then it's quite possibly a show. I mean, I'm not going to say it's been a good show, but honestly, the Lord of the Rings show is a good example of how you can kind of make something last. And even those movies, there was just so much content that those could have been shows as well. But again, they worked for film too. There was finite ends, and it made sense. Can't say the same for Hobbit, but that's another story.
Yeah. We were talking in class about how there's 2 types of television shows.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, I guess what we're probably talking about with TV, you've got serialized and episodic. Episodic can live within the episode, so to speak. So most of your comedies are episodic in that if you miss 1 week, you come back the next week. You didn't really miss much. Yeah, you might miss a little bit, but for the most part, what you did miss, you're caught up with in 5 seconds. It's not hard to follow. Whereas your serialized things, your Breaking Bads, these types of shows where there's just so much happening, so much growth, so much change. I mean, yeah, you could skip an episode and probably be fine, but in the grand scheme of things, if you really want to feel like you know what's happening, you do need to catch every week. It's also why a lot of, at least your major networks, NBC, ABC, they lean towards the episodic stuff in the form of like cop shows and lawyer shows and those kinds of things, because they don't want to worry that their audience is going to miss 1 week and then say, I can't come back and keep watching this. They want you to keep coming back because that's how they make money off the advertisements. So that's why those networks do tend to lean more heavily in that format. And then it seems like a lot of the serialized stuff ends up on cable or streaming.
That was actually an interesting point of like how episodic, a lot of those shows are like detectives and lawyers and that, because like that's a case by case, trial by trial. Like if it's like Grey's Anatomy is a huge one, that's patient by patient, and you also have another thing is like with, you don't have to be purely serialized or purely episodic shows like Law and Order, like the characters do change and they move in and out. The detectives aren't always the same every season. There are some serialized shows where you'll have a throwaway episode and stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we talk about those absolutes don't really exist. Grey's Anatomy, I've only seen a few episodes. I mean, I'd be willing to say that's closer to a split, just based on how many different storylines are happening like regularly. Like I would be afraid if I missed an episode or two, I'd be totally lost with that show. Whereas something like Bones or like Law and Order, yeah, those, if you miss one episode, it's like, oh, they kissed finally after 2 years. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go watch it because I've been waiting 2 years for that to happen. But that's all I missed. Cool. So what's this episode about? This episode's about this drug dealer getting caught or whatever it is. I mean, I was watching The Rookie. I was binging that 2 summers ago with Nathan Fillion in it. And again, like there's a couple things, there's a couple reoccurring bad guys or bad girls that show up that like, oh yeah, that was from the other episode. But for the most part, the relationships take a lot longer in those types of shows because you just don't want them too quick. I mean, just think about any of those shows that you or anybody else has watched. I mean, the relationships of your main characters take a season to start or 2 seasons to start.
Yeah.
They draw it out. And again, that's what makes TV. It's being able to draw it out up to a point that you don't, again, anger your audience because you're just continually doing that, but your audience they'll be patient for a while.
You can only tease them so much though. Yeah. When you mentioned like the villain and like relationships, I always think of Castle because it was like that show took forever for them to actually be a couple, and then they did have like recurring villains and stuff, but it was really just kind of like, oh, it was really a case by case basis, and like you didn't really miss much of like the big drama unless you missed the beginning of the season or the finale of the season. You write singular films, there's a structure to that. We were talking about that. A trilogy, is there a different approach to writing that? Do you break that up into 3 parts because the first movie's the first act, the second movie's the second act, and the third movie's the third act, or do you do a different process?
I'm going to say there shouldn't necessarily be a different process because the moment you really start thinking about it differently, I would feel like a stronger chance that on film 1 or film 2, they don't feel complete because you're really just using it as a piece of a whole. You really do want each film to be able to sort of have its own arc, have its own completion, be able to stand on its own, even within the whole. Again, I would say the Lord of the Rings stuff does that really well, whereas the first one doesn't really feel complete when we're talking about like Endgame and Infinity War. It ends mid-battle. It's clearly not meant to live on its own.
Yeah.
And even the second one, too, to the point that the beginning seems a little less vital because you're kind of using the other film to be your beginning. But yeah, I mean, it depends. But the best way would be to really try to think of them as complete units that only kind of build on top of each other.
Yeah, one of the trilogies I think of a lot of, because I'm a big Star Wars fan, is the first Star Wars movie was not supposed to be a trilogy. It was
Right.
just one movie. He didn't think he was going to ever make another one. And then he did, and it was a huge hit, and of course, and then, so he was like, oh, I'll turn this into a trilogy. If you have one script, you like it, and if it does well or sells well or whatever, you can write another one and build off of it and go from there. You don't have to think of that initially.
Probably having that idea from the get-go is going to help you. But yeah, no, it doesn't have to be there.
If you want to get a script sold or like made, how would you start that process?
Good question. You've got different avenues. If you're a writer and that's all you want to do, cool. But you might still want to take a book out of sort of your more filmmaker, writer, producer, director type of peoples that want to get known, and take a playbook out of theirs. And let's say you write a feature and you're trying to get known, you might want to either turn it into a short or write a short and go make that, because that's going to get, more eyeballs are going to watch a short than necessarily read a short. And even in that case, there's still less eyeballs. Shorts are made just to get recognition. Nobody's paying anything for that.
A lot of horror films start out as like short films, and then they get found or they like go viral or they're popular by like producers pass them around, and eventually they get picked up. And the person who usually wrote or directed the short film will usually go on to direct the big picture movie.
That makes sense. I mean, it's all about budget. And I mean, to make a proper feature, even a horror feature, which can be pretty low budget, it's still a lot of money. Yeah, so I mean, if you're a writer, but that's your main thing, you still be willing to maybe get out there and produce something. Not a feature. Again, that's just too much money, and that's going to be a headache. But you get out there and make it one of your shorts. But even after it's made, then you fall into the same category of what do you do with it. So you've got all kinds of festivals out there. Some are pretty scammy. If you check out Film Freeway, they've got probably 10,000 festivals that you can submit to, and I would be willing to guess that maybe 200 of them are actually even worth the penny that you're submitting to. But if you are brand new, it doesn't hurt to submit to some random no-name festival for $10 so that, hey, you can put something on your resume. Hey, I won this festival. It's not something that you're going to want to do forever, because no, it won't take you anywhere.
Yeah.
But if you need that little padding to get on, that first little step, the baby step, then it's worth it. But ultimately, getting into the bigger festivals, submitting them, connections. I mean, eventually, with a writer, you're going to need some sort of agent, and that's where festival winning can get you in that door. This whole industry is all about networking. So if your buddy's uncle's sister is somebody in the industry, then honestly, I'm somebody that says don't be afraid to ask. But on that note, don't ask 100 times. The moment you go to them, that might be the only moment you get from them. So you better go with like your best of the best of the best. Don't waste their time.
I was looking at like screenwriting competitions, and I know Studio Binder, which is a website that does like, it gives you a lot of guides and like tips on how to make a movie, like with your, like not just writing, but like camera stuff and lighting and audio. They did a screenwriting competition where the entry was free, but you could pay, I can't remember how much, but you could pay for them to give you feedback on your script. So I thought that was really an interesting idea.
Yeah, a lot of the bigger festivals will do that. Like Austin Film Festival. It'll cost money to submit, but you can pay extra to get feedback. Whether or not that's worth it depends on the festival, and honestly, kind of a little Russian roulette, because sometimes they do not get the best readers on these, and they honestly don't know what they're talking about sometimes. So there was a couple years ago where I would say the vast majority of people that got their feedback were just totally confused by what these people were even talking about. It was clear that the people giving the feedback just
didn't know what they were talking about.
But again, it depends. It really does depend.
Yeah, and it should be mentioned that like a script is much easier to read and quicker to read than a book. You're not using the whole page. There's a format to writing a script where you have action lines that are more about description or what a character does. You have a line where it just literally says the name of the character talking, and then you have another line about dialogue, and there's a bunch of other things. So a script, you could really just give it to any of your friends and be like, hey, can you read this and tell me if it's good or not.
Right.
And
Yeah, I mean, the whole point is just to get people to read it. Like, you don't want to slow them down. You don't want to confuse them. And with film scripts, that's not the point. Like, it's just, what is the story? Who are these characters? What are they trying to do? What's the message? And they're not trying to be tricky. I mean, yeah, there's it's not to say there's not layers to what's happening. There's layers, but you will keep moving. Yeah, I mean, if you're reading for some of these festivals and you got, let's say, 100-page feature, I mean, they're going to read that in an hour, if not less.
yeah, we were talking about films cost a lot of money to make. Even like very small films can cost millions of dollars. When you write a script, do you think about the budget, or do you just kind of write?
The only time, well, it depends on what you want to do with the script. I mean, if you're making the script to get sold and not just sort of to get your name out there per se, you still got to think about the budget, because ultimately, if somebody's going to buy it, yes, they're going to want to make it. And if it's, too expensive to make, nobody's going to want to buy it. Part of that's knowing your genres and stuff. I mean, like, if you're trying to do like a romantic comedy or something, and you're trying to sell it, and you're like, oh, this will be fun if I put it in the 40s or something.
Yeah,
cool. But does it matter? And if it doesn't matter, don't, because that's just more money that the production company has to figure out how to get all those cars and those dresses and all that stuff costs more. So, I mean, it's not to say don't write what you want to write, but sometimes, I say this a lot. I wish this whole industry was an art, but it's not. It's a business.
Yeah.
So you've got to think, dollars and cents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were talking about like short films and stuff. Are there different like approaches to writing a short film compared to like a larger script, or do you just kind of use the same structure and just kind of downsize everything?
Sort of. I would say that at least like your sort of award-winning short films have at least in my opinion, a more upfront, a little bit more obvious of a theme, of a message. So rather than kind of burying that under the characters, so to speak, which is probably the better way to get to deliver a message, deliver it through what people are doing and saying.
Yeah.
You tend to see with shorts, that kind of stuff happens a little bit more upfront. And that's more for your 10 to 20, minute page ones. You've got some really short ones under 5 minutes that are more about like a gimmick, so to speak, which are fine too. There's one I've shown in class a couple times about how this guy prints off a piece of paper and there's a black hole in the paper, and then out of nowhere, like wherever he puts that piece of paper, that black hole just creates a hole in that object. So he's grabbing things out of his safe now, and it's like a 4-minute video. He ends up stuck inside the safe because the paper falls off.
Yeah.
And now he's in there. So, but yeah, that's kind of a gimmick. So it doesn't have to be different. No. Is it sometimes? Yeah. But again, back to just your basics. It still has a beginning. It still has a middle. Still has an end. Still has change and struggle. Like, those things are universal.
Yeah. I think like some short films can just literally be like, if you had told somebody that you took this scene out of a movie, they would believe you. But it's just really just like one short film. Yeah.
Yeah. That does happen. You still kind of, back to the trilogy thing, you still might need to tweak it just to give it some proper, whether
context and such.
Yeah, a proper beginning if it wasn't there, or a proper ending if that wasn't there. I have not seen the feature, but I know the Whiplash short film. I've seen that a few times, and I know maybe it's identical to what they used in the feature, but I don't know. Maybe they changed it a little bit just to make it more, complete as a short. But I'm just guessing at that point.
Yeah. What are some like movies or anything that you would recommend to somebody who wants to write films that you would recommend, like, you should go watch this?
I would say watch everything, because that helps, honestly. You need to know. I don't like the word genre much in the way that oftentimes people will say that's a genre film in reference to whatever, like a horror movie or a rom-com or like a sci-fi movie. And for some reason, like, your serious dramatic movies aren't a genre, but they are. It's like some highbrow way of like putting down other films.
Yeah.
But I'm going to use it just as a more general like genre. Anything's a genre at that point. So I would say at the very least, watch tons and tons of the types of movies you want to make. You're not copying things, but there's certain things that have been done, tropes and things like that that they've just been established, and it's not bad to borrow things. Yes, you don't want to totally duplicate things. You do need to make something new, but using something old. You know, what is it? When ladies typically get married, they're supposed to have something new and something old and something like that to make it complete. Like, I think that's what your film needs to have. It needs to have something that fits into that genre that's been established. But make it new, make it a twist, make it this or that. I mean, you know, most we were talking about just noirs a little bit ago, and usually it's, you know, the femme fatale that's like the lady that she doesn't necessarily get kidnapped, but she's kind of the thorn in the side of the guy that's trying to solve the mystery or whatever. So I mean, if you want to do a noir film, like, make it fresh, make the, you know, those sort of gender or sex roles reversed, just to, you know, see what happens that's different at that point. So make it new, make it fresh, but also so that's more story elements, but ultimately story's only half of it, the other half is characters. So probably a good idea would be to kind of go back to like the Academy Awards and watch those films that win like Best Actor and Best Actress, because those are going to give you some insight into some characters that are really interesting. Because again, half the battle's story, half the battle's character. You can't really have one without the other and have a good film. You really do need both. So watch movies you like, especially the movies in the genre that you want to make, and then watch films that just have great characters.
Yeah, I would say, like, don't be afraid to, like, pull an idea from anywhere. Like, you can start a film with, like, just a character idea. Or, like, I started writing a script just because I came up with the title, and then I really liked the title, and so I just figured out what the story would be about, and then went from there. And stuff like that. Yeah,
I mean, I think some writers, maybe more established ones, eventually have their kind of go-to method. They start with a character, or they start with a world, or they start with a random thing, like whatever, or title or something. Mm-hmm. But even established ones, you know, if you pigeonhole yourself too much, you might be missing out on something. So where the sort of spark of idea comes from, you know, just be open to it. It's the old chicken and the egg thing. Story first or character first. Honestly, it doesn't matter. The fact is that we've got chickens and eggs now. And, you know, you've got a story if you've got both. Does it matter which came first? No.
One of the biggest challenges for, like, writers is writer's block. Like, you just sit down, you just can't write anything. And you just, like, nothing you write you like, or, like, you can't think of anything. How do you deal with writer's block?
Sometimes you just have to write crap. And that's part of it. That's one thing. Again, there's different strategies. You just write. Like, you force yourself to write. It doesn't matter. It's the worst thing you've ever written, but you wrote.
Yeah.
And you can delete it.
That's why you were talking about how, like, a lot of scripts have 15 drafts.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
It's
you
better.
Just wrote. You got something there. It's there. You know, it sucks, but you wrote, and you feel accomplished to a degree. So, you know, that's part of it. I mean, without getting into, like I said, sometimes I get into sort of like a research hole. Like, maybe there's some tangent stuff you could be working on so that you're still, like, in the world of what you're supposed to be doing. But again, don't let that become like a normal thing, because then you're not writing anymore. You're researching, and that's like saying you have a great idea for a film. Great, and you're researching it, great, but if it's not written, you don't have it.
Yeah.
So, you know, that can help a little bit. One thing I try to do to prepare myself to be productive for my next writing day, I like to leave myself, like, let's say I have maybe 20 minutes left today to keep writing. I may or may not stop early, but what I try to do is I stop. Let's say I have the scene in my head, mm-hmm. and I could type it all right now. I like to stop in the middle of that scene personally, because what that does is it gives me something tomorrow. I can just jump right in and go.
Okay.
Now, maybe I delayed my writer's block and it pops in after I finish that, but I don't know. That's something that's worked for me pretty good. I can feel great that my next day is going to start productive.
Yeah. And it kind of jump starts to, like, the creative thinking and stuff. I think one of the things I do is, like, I always have a notebook. Like, mm-hmm. you can just buy a notebook at, like, Walmart or whatever. Yeah. And it can be, like, pocket sized or whatever. I just, like, if I have an idea, whether it's for, like, something new or something I'm writing currently, I always write it down.
Yeah.
And so when I go to write, I kind of can look back to that.
Yeah, I've done that from time to time. I think it's great. I've used apps on my phone from time to time. I think the notebook is better because, honestly, you can flip to the page in half a second, whereas with apps and things, sometimes it just gets buried and lost, and
Yeah. It's easy to get distracted on the phone.
and distracted. But yeah, I think a notebook next to your bed and in your backpack at all times is a great idea.
That's probably another tip for writer's block, is not have your phone by you so you can get easily distracted.
It's not so much writer's block, writer's distraction, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I have anything else to add. So thank you, Mr. Cruz.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
To learn more about the Writing for Success podcast and grant project, please visit writingforsuccess.gcsu.edu. You can also find us on Facebook at Andalusia Institute GC, on Instagram at andalusiainstitute.gcsu, and on YouTube, Andalusia Institute GCSU.